No, not really. Welcome to another episode of Spilling Tea, and the final one for today. This afternoon, just an interesting little study that was done in regards to JD versus AH. This is an independent study done in regards to the credibility of Miss AH in regards to the court case. And I just wanted to go over it and share it with you all because I just found it incredibly interesting. Now, just a disclaimer. Of course, you're going to be able to find the link to this wonderful article and study right there in the description so you can read it for yourself. So, without further ado, this is from, granola. TANDFonline.com. So this is the abstract. Structured assessment of witness credibility in intimate partner violence (IPV) allegations has been well established for child custody purposes, although it is far from being systematically implemented, particularly when child custody is not at stake. Unstructured approaches may follow general, long accepted guidelines in legal proceedings, but ignore empirical knowledge about the perpetrators and victims produced by years of cumulative research. Furthermore, judgments are at high risk of being compromised by characteristics of the informant, the listener, and the situation. An accurate analysis of witness credibility is harder to accomplish and more essential when there is no conclusive evidence or when the alleged perpetrator denies the accusations and has no known history of interpersonal violence. To not believe real victims or wrongfully convict innocent individuals are miscarriages of justice that might be prevented to a certain extent if we improve credibility assessment accuracy. In this case report, I used a structured method that demonstrates how a conclusion about the credibility of an alleged victim of IPV can contrast with the conclusion produced by a trial judge. A structured credibility assessment of alleged victim could have produced a different judgment. Implications for individuals, their families, and the justice system are discussed. All right, now we're going into the introduction, and yes, I'm going to read this. This might be a long video. Deal. Extensive opportunity to assess the veracity of witnesses is usually considered in Rules of Evidence and Courtroom Procedures, Spellman and Tinney, 2010. For a long time, judges have had guidelines to determine whether a witness is telling the truth or not. Eggleston, 1978, as cited in June 2016, proposed a checklist with 5 areas that involve testing the consistency of the witness statement with what is agreed or clearly shown to have occurred by available evidence. 2. The coherence among all the pieces of witness evidence. 3. The compatibility among witnesses' several statements or depositions. 4. The credibility of the witness regarding matters not related to the litigation. And 5. The behavior of the witness. In case of intimate partner violence (IPV), these guidelines, although useful as a general approach, ignore the contribution of empirical knowledge produced by years of cumulative research. An evidence-based approach to legal practice needs to consider the social and psychopathological aspects and subcategories of perpetrators and victims and the concurrence of different types of abuse: physical, sexual, emotional, economic. Knowledge about domestic violence typologies, IPV rates among men, women, and other gender collectives, and how they differ whether they're based on police, health setting, or self-report should also assist the legal profession. Furthermore, since the 1980s, researchers have been investigating the nature, characteristics, and implications of false allegations, and the phenomenal components of memories for perceived and imagined autobiographical events. Also, when using unstructured procedures, variables such as characteristics of the informant, the listener, and the situation may easily influence the scrutiny of the witness's credibility. See Spellman and Tinney, 2010, for a review. Risk assessment researchers and practitioners have addressed similar issues by developing the structured professional judgment approach, an analytic method that specifies a fixed set of operationally defined criteria and a coding system. Taking advantage of such method should benefit legal proceedings. One would hope. When evaluating IPV cases, consideration of the perpetrators and victims' psychological, behavioral, and attitudinal attributes is critical, especially when available evidence is limited and testimonies are contradictory, as obviously is in this case. Research is prolific in studies of male perpetrators and female victims, but very limited in cases of female perpetrators, male victims, or lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and non binary gender categories. I'm just going to throw it in there, and disability. Male perpetrators of IPV are considered a heterogeneous group. Holdsworth, Monroe, and Stewart, 1994, identified 3 subtypes of male perpetrators based on the severity and frequency of violent behavior, the use of violence in other contexts than domestic, and the presence of psychopathology. Generally, violent perpetrators resort to violence as a baseline pattern of behavior and frequently displayed traits and characteristics of antisocial or psychopathic personalities. Family-only perpetrators use violence only within the family and present less psychopathology, although they may display traits of passive-dependent personality disorder. Finally, dysphoric borderline perpetrators characteristically show symptoms of borderline personality disorder and or depression, and direct violence primarily against their partners, but they may also be violent to strangers or friends. Regarding victims, Pereira et al. 2020 reviewed 31 studies with female samples and concluded no particular personality pattern that directly causes victimization. However, the authors found that avoidant, self-destructive, borderline, and paranoid personality traits are prevalent among women who remain in abusive relationships. These women present with low self-esteem, insecurity, submissiveness, self-blame, increased social isolation, and financial and emotional dependence on their abusers. Evidence may be limited because the victim did not disclose the abuse to third parties or because the accusations are false. False allegations based on a convincing script may easily succeed throughout the legal process. Regarding violence in intimate contexts, building a convincing script is not difficult because the topic is widely discussed in public forums, where many victims have openly shared their stories. Portraying the perpetrator as a jealous man with callous, unemotional traits who abuses alcohol and drugs and despises women. Oh, wow. She must have read this playbook, Miss A.H. Concurs with stereotypes supported by dominant theories and social movements that claim gender inequalities and sexism within patriarchal societies are the basis of domestic violence. Bell and Nagel, 2008. Wow. Somebody did their homework. Stories of coercive control and intimate terrorism, victims' isolation, and escalation of violence to the point of the victim's death often capture attention in mainstream and social media, reinforcing these stereotypes. Boy, do we in the disability world know all about those stereotypes. However, when an individual has not experienced the overwhelming burden of violence inflicted by a partner, it is almost impossible to reproduce the psychological imprint that this type of abuse invariably generates. But on the other side, however, when we just simply believe people and not even look into this, saying. Conversely, the emotional behavioral indicators of psychological harm produced by IPV are readily apparent, even in cases where intimate terrorism, Johnson 2008, did not occur. Fear is a dominant emotion in IPV victims' lives and is easily revoked even in contexts and environments unrelated to the abuse of a relationship. PTSD. Jacques and Sullivan 2014, Triozzi 2018. Therefore, assessing the credibility of testimony is essential in both instances of false allegations and where real victims have hidden abuse. By adding psychological aspects of the perpetrator and victim to the evaluation, it is possible to improve the accuracy of the assessment, as I will demonstrate in this study. Since the beginning of this century, the prevailing social climate has encouraged victims, especially women, to report the abuse they suffer behind closed doors. The discrepancy between the number of cases reported to authorities and those revealed in crime victimization, surveys indicate that many cases are still underreported, especially in the disability community. Morgan and Truman, 2018. This underreporting might be even more prevalent regarding male victims. In 2012, while analyzing data from the U.S. National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, HOF 2012, found that men are victims of IPV as often as women, and in 2011, 40% of the severe physical violence was directed toward men. This finding contradicts the data provided by police reports, where women are greatly overrepresented. Among the LGBTQ community, some authors assert that IPV rates are similar to or greater than rates for heterosexual couples. Chin et al. 2013, Roll et al. 2018. But the actual number is largely unknown. Violent victimization in intimate contexts is also frequently hidden by older women. Gracia 2003, Zink et al. 2004. Also, for disabled women, that is double so, and really young ages. We have beaten to us that nobody's going to believe us anyway because we have a disability, and they'll just play it off as well. They don't really see reality like it really is. Just saying. Overstreet and Quinn, 2013, Fear of Retaliation from Partners, Veranda et al., 2018, Lack of Social and Economic Support, and a Concern for the Well-Being of Their Children, Eckstein, 2011, are common motives that lead the victims to conceal abuse and stay in abusive relationships. To solicit help, men victims must first overcome internal and external obstacles regarding widely socially accepted gender notions of male and female roles in relationships. Galdus et al. 2005. For members of the LGBTQ community, the hostile and stressful social environment they usually suffer due to stigma, prejudice, and discrimination, Meyer 2003, might discourage them to seek help among their informal social network. Once victims decide to report the abuse, due to humiliation and escalation of violence, they feel compelled to protect others, have increased awareness of their options to access to support, recognize that the abuser is not going to change, or because the partner has been unfaithful, Change et al. 2010. They may not be believed. The risk of not being believed is higher in cases where the victim has not documented the abuse, has never reported to the authorities, has falsely informed health professionals, downplayed the injuries, or not collected evidence. On the other hand, false allegations in legal cases are a serious problem and have a detrimental effect on law enforcement and the justice system. Hole et al. 2016. Deceit and falsehood by individuals involved in judicial proceedings with the intent on manipulating the legal system can often lead to miscarriages of justice with dire consequences for those falsely accused, their families, and society in general. We've all seen that, haven't we? Motives related to economic or personal gain, self-interest, or revenge are usually the basis of intentionally false complaints. It's necessary to implement a systematically structured assessment of the credibility of testimony to prevent the perversion of justice and wasted police time, both of which are considered offenses in some countries. The goal is to hinder judicial proceedings' impact on the lives of the innocent individuals wrongly accused. For example, research shows that in occupations of trust, false allegations of abuse have irreparable effects on the individual's employment and financial situations, psychological and physical health, and family members' health and well-being. Hoyle et al. 2016. Regarding IPV, individuals arrested are almost immediately labeled batterers, regardless of whether they are guilty or not, and the negative psychological consequences remain, even after exoneration or overturned convictions. Brooks and Greenberg, 2021. This effect is intensified online and on social media, where hearsay spreads rapidly, and the public opinion judges and condemns without having the capacity to assess evidence and often without much concern for the truth. In the case of allegations against men, social movements such as Me Too and Time's Up have been powerful promoters that all women must be believed, implying that men are guilty until proven innocent. The rate of false allegations in legal proceedings is largely unknown. Fawcett, 2014, Herschelschwert, 2010. In 2013, a study commissioned by the Director of Public Prosecutions in the UK found that the number of individuals prosecuted for falsely accusing someone of rape or domestic violence, 92% women and 8% men, was low. Levitt and Crown Prosecution Service and Equality Diversity Unit, 2013. Nonetheless, this number might represent just the tip of the iceberg. The lack of economic resources to pay for legal proceedings, new psychological and social resources to cope with emotional burden, skepticism that justice will be delivered, or fear that the case might become more damaging, might deter falsely accused individuals from pursuing justice. Harming the partner is always the underlying motivation to produce false allegations, but there is often an instrumental purpose, and the scientific literature points out the differences between men and women. Some studies have found that it is women who primarily use or threaten to use false allegations of violence as a way to dominating male partners. Hinning et al. 2006, Hines et al. 2007, or with the specific purpose of getting them arrested. Cook, 2009, Douglas et al. 2012. Conversely, Tromke and Bala, 2005, suggested that in child custody disputes, women are primarily the victims of false allegations. The assessment of accusations' veracity and fundamental in any case, independent of the gender or the alleged victim and perpetrator. The necessity of utilizing structured credibility assessment of testimony in rape and sexual assault cases to prevent the wrongful conviction of innocent individuals and the re-victimization of real victims. Fear of disbelief, unjustified blame, is widely discussed issue. Statement validity analysis, Crokin and Steller, 1988. Criteria-based content analysis, Steller and Crokin, 1989. And reality monitoring, Johnson and Ray, 1981, as theoretically and empirically grounded methods. Hotch et al. 2017, McDougall and Bull, 2015, or Belander et al. 2016, and Volbert and Steller, 2014, whose results are accepted as evidence in trials for sexual crimes in the U.S. and some European courts. Bridge, 2005. Several authors have pointed out the importance of systematically validating alleged victims' statements in divorce proceedings in which the custody of children is at stake. Austin and Drozd, 2012, Austin et al. 2004, Hamel, 2020, Mausam-Wildig, 2016, Austin 2000 proposed a framework and assessment guidelines that have been recommended by the authorities in the U.S. to assist in such cases. Jaffa et al. 2008, Johnston et al. 2009. These guidelines merge with Eggleston's and with current psychological empirical knowledge. The benefit of using structured assessment over unstructured judgments has been well established for forensic clinical purposes. An evaluation of risk for violence and reoffending. Andrews et al. 2006, Douglas and Croak 2002, Levin et al. 2016, Monahan, 2001. To the best of my knowledge, an evidence-based structured evaluation tool has not yet been developed for the general assessment of witness credibility in IPV cases. However, I found the 6-factor test proposed by Austin 2000 a suitable and useful approach. In this case, I applied it to demonstrate the type of judgment a rational and scientifically grounded procedure can produce. The case. I purposely selected this case because of the significant amount of publicly available information, which granted the possibility to perform an assessment without interviewing the alleged perpetrator and victim. The case is a libel claim presented in an English court over allegations of severe and repeated physical assault to a woman, A.H., by her former husband, Mr. Depp, which allegedly caused her significant injuries and led to her fearing for her life. The claim was filed by Mr. Depp, the claimant, against the news group newspapers, the publishers of the Sun newspaper, a UK tabloid, and his executive editor, the defendant, who published the allegations in a 2018 article that initially labeled Mr. Depp a wife-beater. Although newspapers retroactively edited the article's headline to remove wife-beater label, the article remained otherwise the same. The article specifies, overwhelming evidence was filed to show Johnny Depp engaged in domestic violence against A.H., backed by numerous friends on record. Bullshit. Bullshit, he didn't do any of it. Recounted detailed history of domestic abuse incidents, some of which had led to her fearing for her life. Bullshit. According to court documents, there were kicks, punches, shoves, and all-out assault. Garbage. Complete garbage. Upon publication of the article, Mr. Depp lost movie roles in the film industry, and the mainstream media heavily portrayed him as a perpetrator of domestic violence. In support of the defendant, A.H. reported 14 separate incidents of physical assault over a 3-year period, 2013 through 2016. In 3 of these incidents, she also reported sexual assault. Bullshit. Information related to the alleged sexual assaults was treated confidentially and therefore excluded from the analysis. Table 1 displays a summary of A.H.'s account of injuries she suffered during the 14 incidents of physical assault and evidence she provided. Table 1. Summary of A.H.'s account of the injuries she suffered during the alleged 14 incidents of violence and evidence provided by her. Online source 1 offers further details of the violence of each of the 14 alleged incidents reported by A.H. in her own words, which is the most nauseating read I've ever read. I've never read more confusing and contradictory statements in my life, and I've been someone who's been a part of fighting against the JRC for the last 13 years. I thought their crap was sketchy. This woman, oh my God. Moving on. The court trial was called to determine whether the article was true, whether the alleged incidents had in fact occurred. Mr. Depp denied ever assaulting or being physically violent with A.H. Moreover, during his declaration, Mr. Depp reported that A.H. was the abusive partner in their relationship. Several witnesses who had been in close contact with both parties during their marriage, and thus saw the couple interact in numerous occasions, testified in support of Mr. Depp, declaring they witnessed direct violence by A.H. against him. Alleged my ass. As a direct consequence of A.H.'s violent... Oh, no, I'm sorry, no. Let me rewind. No, allegedly as a direct consequences of A.H.'s violent behavior. Allegedly my ass, she did it. Mr. Depp was once severely injured, requiring hospitalization and surgery. Yeah, that's been proven. Alleged my ass. However, since the alleged abuse perpetrated toward Mr. Depp was not a matter for the court during this trial, I will make no reference to it in the analysis. It's relevant, jackass. Just saying. Suffice it to say that the couple received marital therapy at some point, after which health professionals involved referred to the relationship as a toxic marriage. That is such a cop-out. That is such a cop-out. That is what people claim when they want to appear non-biased. It is such a major cop-out. That's the sense of denial. They want to lay the blame at the feet of both of them when only one of them was a perpetrator. It's bullshit, it's victim blaming, and it's got to go. Just saying. In this trial, the defendant had to prove that the allegations of abuse occurred, application of the UK Defamation Act 2013. In other words, the defendant had to prove that Mr. Depp beat A.H., causing her to suffer significant injury and leading to her to fear for her life. They didn't. They didn't prove it at all. At all. I've never seen such a line of garbage. Moving on. Being a libel case, the balance of probability applies. The court is called to determine whether the occurrence of the event was more likely than not, and therefore the standard of evidence is lower than in a criminal case. How they can, all the evidence, say that it was likely? It's like dealing with JRC documents, I swear to God. Moving on. Being a libel case, the balance of probability applies, i.e. the courts determine whether the occurrence of the event is more likely than not, and therefore the standard of evidence is lower than in a criminal case. In total, 30 witnesses, 8 in support of A.H. and 22 in support of Mr. Depp. Let me read that again for you idiots in the background that still defend this woman. 8? 8. 8. As opposed to 22. Just the same. Provided testimony. Online source 2 provides details related to these witnesses. In his unstructured judgment, the judge continually found the testimonies produced by A.H., her friends, and her sister credible, heavily relying on them despite the availability of other evidence and more credible testimonies, thus concluding that physical violence occurred in 12 of the 14 incidents. Thank you. Even this guy's like, the hell? Material and methods. The information was collected mainly from court documents publicly available online. In particular, I considered the 7 witnesses of A.H. for the High Court of Justice, Queen's Bench Division Media and Communications, 8 witness statements and depositions in support of A.H.'s testimony, 22 witness statements and depositions in support of Mr. Depp's claim, audio recordings with private conversations between the spouses, a video of Mr. Depp recorded by A.H., notes produced by health professionals, nurses, a doctor, and a psychotherapist concerning their assistance to A.H., multiple photos and text messages between different persons, produced by A.H. as evidence to support her statement, and CCTV footage produced by Mr. Depp as evidence to support his statement. I included the declarations of Mr. Depp and his cross-examination in the analysis to assess his substance abuse problems, which I did not have access to in his medical history. Furthermore, to complement the evaluation, I searched the internet for information related to Mr. Depp's current or past behavior regarding violence, drug use, and problematic behavior of any kind, specifically assault or aggression while under influence of drugs or alcohol. Online Source 3 identifies all the online sources used. The assessment included the 6-factor test proposed by Austin 2000 and the brief spousal assault form for the evaluation of risk, Be Safer Hart 2004. The 6-factor test specifically assesses the credibility of allegations of violence against a partner. In a thorough search of scientific literature, I was unable to find other instruments or approaches developed with the specific purpose of assessing the credibility of testimony in cases of IPV. The Be Safer was developed to assist criminal justice professionals in assessing and managing the risk for partner abuse, meaning that it is used for predictive purposes. It includes 10 risk factors that empirical evidence has shown best predicts IPV recidivism. I used the 10 risk factors considered in this tool to determine probability that Mr. Depp was in fact an IPV perpetrator and characterized seriousness of the abuse in context to the scientific literature. Cantus et al. 2015, Peterson Strand 2020. 6-factor test. The 6-factor test is proposed to be employed in IPV cases when there is no legal substantiation of alleged abuse. The test evaluates plausibility, I need more caffeine, of the allegations through the analysis and convergence of multiple data sources, factors 1, 2, 3, and 4, and merges it with the psychological characteristics of the alleged perpetrator, factor 5, and alleged victim, factor 6. It employs the same approach as other allegations of risk. Excuse me, I don't have an edit button. Rewind. Okay. Factors 1, 2, 3, and 4, and merges it with the psychological characteristics of the alleged perpetrator, factor 5, and alleged victim, factor 6. It employs the same approach as other applications of a risk assessment model, presenting the result in terms of the degree of confidence of the allegations. To the best of my knowledge, there are no studies that validate this instrument, but it has been proposed to be included in the forensic protocol for the Integrated Framework for Child Custody Evaluation in cases of suspected IPV, Austin and Droist, 2012. The 6 factors evaluate the following information. Factor 1, objective verification. Observes the frequency and severity of data in police complaints, medical records, or other observations by neutral third parties. I also used pictures and video material provided as evidence to assess this factor. Factor 2. Pattern of abuse complaints. Considers official reports and unofficial complaints to others, making allegations more credible if reports and complaints surface before the divorce dispute, even without prosecution. Factor 3. Corroboration by the credible others. Analyzes information collected by credible, i.e., neutral, third parties, which is crucial in the absence of prior prosecution. As Austin 2000 indicates, relatives and friends are considered biased witnesses and untrustworthy because affective bonds might cause them to have personal interest in the confirming testimony of their party. In addition, persons with dependent relationship, employees, ongoing contracts, might have a financial conflict of interest beside the other constraints that may occur in a relation of power, and therefore feel compelled to corroborate their party's account of the events. In this regard, they are also considered non-credible witnesses. The more neutral the third party is, the higher the credibility. Factor 4. Absence of disconfirming verbal reports by credible third parties. Considers whether credible third parties who had ample opportunity to observe or interact with the couple provide information that disconfirms the abuse allegations. Factor 5. Psychological profile and past history of abusive behavior by alleged perpetrator of marital violence. Uses the risk assessment approach. In this case, I applied the Be Safer detailed below. Factor 6. Psychological status of the alleged victim's spouse addresses the psychological imprint of abuse considering what scientific research has revealed about victims. For example, individuals who have victims of abuse are at increased risk of developing anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and substance use disorder. Degold et al. 2019, Natson 2012, Yu et al. 2019. The assessment provides a rationale for the identified level of credibility, high, low, or ambiguous. The Be Safer. The Be Safer compromises risk factors organized in two clusters. The first cluster contains risk factors, 1 through 6, that cover a general antisocial component and relate to the alleged perpetrator's history of spousal abuse. The second cluster contains 4 risk factors, 7 through 10, related to the alleged perpetrator's history of psychological and social functioning. Using qualitative analysis, Kropp and Hart, 2004, showed that the instrument achieved a high level of inter-rater reliability. A validation study conducted on a sample of male IPV perpetrators and controls, all et al. 2008, reported the predictive accuracy of 95% of the cases, and the scores correlated positively with both the psychological and physical abuse scales of the conflict tactic scales. Strauss et al. 1996. A self-report instrument used to assess interpersonal violence. The 10 risk factors are assessed as follows. Number 1, serious physical violence examines the history of abuse perpetration of current and former partners. Number 2, serious violent threat ideation intent considers credible threats of violence, harassing and stalking behavior in any form. Surveilling, following unwanted communications. Any behaviors or threat of capable of producing significant fear in the victim is considered relevant. 3. Escalation of violence or threats means that the violence deployed during the assaults or the threats have increased in frequency or severity over time. Number 4. Violations of civil or criminal court orders considers specifically those related to IPV criminal behavior. Number 5. Negative attitudes about spousal assault includes indicators of possessiveness, strong sexual jealousy, attitudes demonstrating misogyny and patriarchy, and minimization or denial of the consequences of violent behavior. 6. Other serious criminality includes violent offenses, property offenses, drug-related crime, public disorder, or other crimes not related to spousal assault. Number 7. Relationship problems includes serious marital discord, conflict, continual arguments, quarrels, and fights. 8. Employment and or financial problems includes poor work performance, absenteeism, frequent job changes, or long-term unemployment. Number 9. Substance abuse, including alcohol abuse, has been extensively associated with IPV. See for a review, Choini 2017. Although some studies suggest the association might be moderated by an aggressive personality component in the presence of antisocial attitudes. Jaffa 2009. 10. Mental disorder includes major mental disorders of the psychotic spectrum, extreme depression or anxiety, and personality disorders, especially those that involve empathy impairments, narcissistic, borderline, and antisocial, which have been identified as strong risk factors for IPV. Romero Martinez, 2016. The factors are rated as not present, partially present, or present. Sorry, for some reason in this summer, the allergy issues have not gone away. Analysis. After getting acquainted with material and searching for complementary information online, I proceeded as follows. For Factor 1, objective verification, I cross-checked information in police records, health professional notes, photos provided as evidence, and CCTV footage. Regarding Factor 2, pattern of abuse complaints, I checked the consistency of information provided by AH in her statements and messages she exchanged with others. Regarding Factors 3 and 4, corroboration by credible others in absence of disconfirming verbal reports by credible third parties. I first classified the witnesses as credible or non-credible sources, then verified the information reported only by the credible ones. However, I considered the consistency between AH's testimony and the testimony given on her behalf, i.e., non-credible sources, regarding details about the incidents of violence. To characterize Factor 5, psychological profile and past history of abusive behavior by alleged perpetrator of marital violence, I verified the information in AH's statements, medical notes, exchanges of messages, a video of Mr. Depp recorded by AH, and information online. Finally, to characterize Factor 6, psychological status of alleged victimized spouse, I searched for indicators of depression and traumatic stress in AH's statements and the notes from health professionals. Furthermore, I searched for indicators of trauma bonding and typical victimization and verbal behavior, begging for forgiveness, trying to comply with the abuser's wishes, in an auto-recording of a conversation between the spouses. To address this factor, I consider AH's statements, clinical notes by professionals, and a consensually recorded conversation between AH and Mr. Depp. Results. Objective verification. AH never reported to the police as having been a victim of a physical assault by Mr. Depp. An anonymous person first, and later, a friend of AH contacted the police on the night of the last reported alleged incident, Incident 14. 2 different patrols attended the calls, but AH did not report abusive behavior by Mr. Depp to any of the officers. 2 officers, one with extensive experience in investigating and detecting domestic violence, testified that they saw no injuries or indication that Ms. Heard had been harmed. They did not see traces of property damage, vandalism, or any other clue that made them suppose an altercation had occurred. AH offered evidence that she visited a private medical clinic after one of the alleged incidents, which, according to her, caused her bruises on her face, a swollen nose, a bleeding lip, and a hurting scalp. In the medical annotation, 2 things stand out. First, there is no indication that of the injuries AH reported. Second, the note indicated that AH had last been seen in the office at a later date than she indicated the incident had occurred, raising the suspicion that the medical annotation might not be related to the incident at all. Although AH reported that she had serious visible injuries in several of the alleged incidents, cut feet and arms, bleeding nose, lump on the head, busted lip, and the violence she described suggests that she suffered major harm, falling on a ping pong table and breaking it, being dragged by her hair through the apartment, hitting her head against the apartment's exposed brick wall. She never received medical attention for injuries, even when a doctor and a nurse were present to attend Mr. Depp's injuries. Thank you! I've been saying that all along. In Incident 12, AH reported, "My ribs were hurt, my movement was stiff, I was in pain." However, a nurse that visited her only took note that she did not see the hematomas AH had described, which implies she had physically explored her and did not notice injuries besides a bleeding lip. After Incident 13, AH disclosed by text message to the nurse who used to visit her that Mr. Depp had assaulted her. Nonetheless, the nurse replied, saying, "It sounds very scary," but did not ask if AH was injured, needed medical attention, or any other question to be expected from a health professional in a situation of known or suspected IPV. Thank you. Like I've said many times, folks, I have been around hospitals my entire life. All medical professionals, regardless of the victim's wishes, if they even suspect abuse might be a part of it, must report it. That's part of their job. Just saying. In total, I reviewed 10 annotations of nurses, a medical doctor, and a psychotherapist, mainly regarding incidents 8 and 12. There is no record of physical injury seen on AH besides a bleeding lip. The health professionals referred to altercations between the spouses as arguments and labeled the marriage a toxic relationship and a relationship volatile and destructive. I saw no indication that the health professionals involved suspected an IPV situation, nor did they take any action despite multiple times AH said she complained to them. The fact that she blames the doctors is ridiculous because, having worked for the Department of Mental Health, we are all mandated reporters from day one that we start our jobs. If we even suspect something like this is going on, we can lose our jobs if we don't report it. Okay? Yeah, just saying. As AH provided multiple photos taken by herself, her friends, and third parties supposedly to support her statements. Of all the photos taken on the days the alleged incidents occurred, none revealed the severity of injuries AH reported or other signs that one might expect from the alleged violence she claims she suffered. Photos taken with friends and colleagues shortly after alleged events 2 and 12 show no apparent injuries to her face, which AH explained was due to the use of heavy makeup. However, heavy makeup could not possibly have covered swollen areas. AH has also provided a photo of herself taken shortly after Incident 2 in front of a mirror with a bruise on her arm. The metadata shows she took the photo the day after the alleged incident. However, on that day, AH sent a picture to her mother with the reference from 2 weeks ago, which demonstrates that the bruise could not have been caused by Mr. Depp, as she stated. Regarding Incident 8, AH took several photos of damaged property, allegedly caused by Mr. Depp, but she did not photograph the multiple cuts on her arms and feet that she claims she suffered. Regarding Incident 12, AH took photos of her face with dark areas under her eyes, but none of the nurses who visit her made any note of this. In one photo, AH appears to have a drop of blood on her lip, but no pattern of traumatic injury on her lips or her mouth. Several photos show AH's face with a red area surrounding her right eye the day she filed for a temporary restraining order, TRO, as evidence of the violence that allegedly occurred during Incident 14. However, CCTV footage from the building where she lived showed no injuries on her face the days immediately after the alleged incident took place, and there were also no marks on her face in the public photographs taken the day after she filed for the TRO. Pattern of abuse complaints. In her statements, AH indicated, "Throughout the relationships, others noticed I had cuts and bruises. I made excuses. People asked me, 'Is he hitting you?' I would deflect it. I wasn't sharing it with people because I was trying to protect him in our relationship, and to protect myself from the humiliation I felt that about anyone knowing that I would allow this to happen to me. I became an expert in covering up the bruises and injuries. Later in a relationship, it became impossible to hide. I was reserved but increasingly open with the few people I could trust about what was happening to me. On the contrary, AH supplies evidence showing that from the beginning of her relationship with Mr. Depp, she continually text messaged her parents, sister, friends, medical staff, and commented to others who were working for her, reporting to them that Mr. Depp assaulted her. In this case, the unofficial complaints surfaced before the divorce, which is a positive point for credibility. But it is noteworthy that AH reported to multiple persons contrary to her statement. AH was not socially isolated. She interacted with multiple persons the days the alleged incidents occurred, or immediately afterward, including her sister, her friends, Mr. Depp's friends, persons who worked for her, persons who worked for Mr. Depp, nurses, and personnel of the building. In addition, of the alleged incidents occurred in public places: motel, hotel, airplane, and train. Furthermore, AH has reported that some of these incidents were witnessed directly by others, such as her sister, friends, and people related to Mr. Depp. However, no evidence was presented suggesting that any of them intervened on her behalf at the time the alleged incidents occurred. She was never taken to a medical setting. Thank you! Encouraged to report the alleged abuse, or given shelter considering her fear for Mr. Depp. On contrary, text messages from AH's parents to Mr. Depp demonstrate that they continued to have a friendly relationship throughout the marriage, and AH's friends continued to neighbor her rent-free and dwellings owned by Mr. Depp. Corroborative by credible others. Among 30 witnesses who supported either AH's or Mr. Depp's statements, I've considered friends, close acquaintances, current employees, and those contractual relationship with them non-credible because of their effective personal relation or possible financial conflict of interest in the case. This excluded all 8 witnesses from AH's side and 7 out of the 22 from Mr. Depp's side. From the 15 testimonies considered credible, 2, Mr. Depp's ex-partners, were considered only for the analysis of Factor 5, specifically to characterize his history of abusive behavior. No credible witnesses corroborated AH's account of events. Isn't that interesting? As a side note, the statements of the non-credible witnesses by AH partially corroborated her account of the events, based on what AH herself disclosed to them, or what they had heard from other friends. AH's sister was the only witness who reported seeing Mr. Depp punch AH on one occasion. A friend testified that she witnessed Mr. Depp's intent to perform a violent act, although she did not directly witness him beating AH. When comparing AH's statements with those of the non-credible sources who have testified on her behalf, discrepancies emerge in the details of several incidents. For example, AH has stated about the incident 9, I also remember Johnny and I were shouting at each other. At some point, he started hitting me. Everything happened very quickly. I recall Whitney standing between Johnny and I when he was trying to attack me. However, in her statement, Whitney, AH's sister, testified, Johnny was still on the ground floor, then starting to come up the stairs towards us. I was on the top of the stairs, and I stood facing Amber, but between them. Somehow I was pushed out of the way, so I wasn't between them, when Johnny grabbed her by the hair. Absence of disconfirming verbal reports by credible third parties. I consider the following third parties credible, and as of interest while assessing this factor. 1. 2 estate managers who had no contractual relationship with Mr. Depp at the time of their deposition. 2. 3 concierges of the building where the couple had shared home. 3. A stylist who occasionally worked with AH and Mr. Depp. And 4. 2 police officers. The estate managers declared that they had never witnessed Mr. Depp being violent or committing any act of physical assault against AH. They explicitly stated they had never noticed any cuts, bruises, redness, marks, or swellings on AH's face or any visible part of her body. One of these witnesses also stated that AH had altered pieces of evidence, changed how a clump of hair and a split braid appeared in photos. The 3 concierges testified that they saw AH at close distance and apparently makeup-free on the days she stated she had visible injuries on her face. All 3 witnesses reported they saw no marks or bruises, thus disconfirming AH's testimony. Likewise, the stylist disproves AH's testimony regarding Incident 12, in which she proclaimed that a makeup artist had covered bruises on her face. The stylist related, I could see clearly that AH did not have any visible marks, bruises, cuts, or injuries to her face. The testimony of police officers contradicted that of AH and her 2 friends. The officers were called after Mr. Depp allegedly threw a mobile device hitting AH on the face and leaving a visible red mark surrounding her right eye that she photographed. However, the officer who spoke to with AH in closer proximity testified that she had no visible marks. Psychological profile and past history of abusive behavior by alleged perpetrator of marital violence. AH describes Mr. Depp as presenting many of the characteristics found in male perpetrators of IPV. According to her, Mr. Depp is a possessive and controlling man whose jealousy was primary motive for his alleged violent behavior, which escalated because of his drug and alcohol abuse. She reported that in general, anger preceded the alleged episodes of physical violence, and his rage would intensify to the point that Mr. Depp lost control. This description fits the family-only perpetrator who only commits violent acts in domestic contexts. Peterson and Strand, 2020. The violence this type of perpetrator commits is reactive by nature, generally in response to a perceived threat, suspicion the partner is cheating on them. Innes et al., 2017. On the other hand, AH also characterized Mr. Depp as self-centered and arrogant person. One second, I'm sorry. Sorry, like I said, allergies. Let me get a drink of water. Sorry, I don't have an edit button. Okay, rewind. The violence this type of perpetrator commits is reactive by nature, generally in response to a perceived threat. Et al. Suspicion that the partner is cheating on them. Innes et al. 2017. On the other hand, AH also characterized Mr. Depp as a self-centered and arrogant person with a lack of empathy, who occasionally behaved recklessly, showing no concern for the safety of others. Complete bullshit. She also stated that Mr. Depp was capable of self-control, thus he would not assault her in the presence of third parties. This description fits a type of IPV perpetrator who is more goal-oriented, instrumentally violent, and who generalizes the violent behavior to context besides domestic. This type is referred to as generally violent in the scientific literature. Lee et al. 2018. These two types of IPV perpetrators differ significantly in their personalities and the psychological mechanisms behind their violent behavior. It is not consistent with the current empirical knowledge to find both types of profiles in one perpetrator. After analyzing the information available, I found no evidence that Mr. Depp matches the profile of a family-only or generally violent type of IPV offender. In 2013, the year that AH reported the alleged violent episodes started, Mr. Depp was 50 years old and had no previous history of being violent against intimate partners. Mr. Depp's history of violence is restricted to one episode in 1999 where he threatened photographers with a wooden plank because they were trying to gain access to his then pregnant partner. In 2018, a lawsuit was filed against Mr. Depp, accusing him of assaulting a man on a movie set. However, several witnesses testified on behalf of Mr. Depp, denying the accusations. According to the information I have, Mr. Depp has no convictions for violence in the UK, US, or any other jurisdiction. It is improbable that someone of Mr. Depp's age would suddenly develop a pattern of severe violent behavior in the absence of previous history of violence and no documented severe mental health problems. Liu et al. 2013. Thank you. The evidence AH provided allegedly shows Mr. Depp committed several acts of property damage, including defacing a painting, Incident 2, destructing a bathroom light fixture, Incident 3, writing graffiti with blood and painting on walls and mirrors, Incident 8, and writing a message to Miss Heard with a marker on a kitchen countertop, Incident 13. In 1994, Mr. Depp was charged with a felony mischief when he caused significant damage to a hotel room. One video recorded AH shows Mr. Depp in a rage slamming cabinets in their kitchen. The video shows Mr. Depp destroying property, but he is not physically violent against AH at any moment, nor does she show any indication of being afraid of him. In sum, Mr. Depp has a history of destroying property, but not being violent against persons. Serious physical violence. Besides the alleged violent incidents reported by AH, there is no indication that Mr. Depp has ever committed serious physical violence against other intimate partners or other persons. Serious violent threats, ideation, and intent. Of approximately 70,000 text messages exchanged between Mr. Depp and numerous others during his marriage with Miss Heard, the defendant selected one as evidence that Mr. Depp threatened her. In this message he sent to a friend, Mr. Depp wrote, "Let's drown her before we burn her. I will F her burnt corpse afterwards to make sure she's dead." Nonetheless, this message was never sent to AH, nor was it meant to be seen by her. Apart from the testimony of AH, there is no evidence that Mr. Depp had either seriously threatened or intended to commit serious violence against her. Escalation of violence or threats. As previously stated, beyond AH's testimony, there is no evidence of the existence of physical violence committed by Mr. Depp against her or any other person, nor escalation of threats. Violation of civil or criminal court orders. AH filed a TRO against Mr. Depp in May 2016. The restraining order was violated by AH, who voluntarily, and without being requested by Mr. Depp, met him alone in a hotel room. There is no evidence that Mr. Depp purposely violated the TRO or committed any other act of violation of civil or court orders. Negative attitudes about spousal assault. According to AH, Mr. Depp did not respect women, especially women who do not behave according to the traditional female norms. For example, in her statement, AH reported she stopped wearing revealing dresses because that was a motive for verbal and psychological abuse by Mr. Depp. However, a search online shows that during their relationship, AH was photographed repeatedly in revealing clothes for several magazines, and she publicly disclosed in 2014 that she had not noticed change in her career due to her engagement with Mr. Depp. Besides Ms. Heard's characterization of Mr. Depp's attitudes towards women, I could not find testimonies or evidence that Mr. Depp ever demonstrated socio-political, religious, cultural, subcultural, or personal values and beliefs that might encourage or excuse psychological or physical violence against a spouse or women in general. Other serious criminality. Mr. Depp has never been arrested, prosecuted, or convicted for commission of serious criminal acts. Relationship problems. Mr. Depp had several intimate partners prior to his relationship with AH. He maintained a 14-year relationship with the mother of his children, who testified on his behalf, acknowledging him as kind, attentive, generous, and nonviolent person and father, Miss Parody. Another of his ex-partners also provided testimony, acknowledging him as a nonviolent person, claiming that he was never violent towards me. He was never abusive at all towards me, Miss Ryder. As a long-term veteran of the Hollywood film industry, Mr. Depp has been under scrutiny of extensive media coverage, but never reported as a confrontational or violent person with his partners before his relationship with AH. He is not known for maintaining simultaneous partner relationships or having frequent short-term marital relations. In this sense, to the best of my knowledge, and after reviewing all the information available, Mr. Depp's relationship with AH was the most problematic in his life. That's an understatement. Okay. Employment and or financial problems. Mr. Depp is a wealthy man with a long career in the film industry, besides other artistic ventures. Some financial problems have been made public, and he acknowledged it in an interview to a tabloid in which he explicitly says that he had lost hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. However, these losses were far from a critical situation or bankruptcy, and Mr. Depp was never on the verge of poverty. Regarding employment, there is no evidence that Mr. Depp had any serious problems until AH filed the TRO and made allegations of IPV public. At that time, many tabloids announced that Mr. Depp was fired from one of his movie roles. After the judgment of his trial against the Sun newspaper was made public, Mr. Depp was asked to resign from another of his movie roles. However, Mr. Depp continues successfully developing activities as an actor, movie producer, and musician. I can't talk. Substance abuse. Ms. Heard reported Mr. Depp was taking large doses of multiple types of medically prescribed and illegal drugs, as well as enormous amounts of alcohol beverages during the entirety of their relationship. Several text messages between Mr. Depp and a friend show that he requested to be supplied with legal and illegal drugs while he was in a foreign country. Incident 8. Mr. Depp underwent opiate detoxification during their marriage. He has spoken publicly about his drug use and alcohol habits, which started during adolescence and intermittently had been a part of his life. During cross-examination, Mr. Depp confirmed that he had been hospitalized twice for alcohol detoxification prior to his relationship with AH. Although Mr. Depp's drug and alcohol abuse is consistently documented, and therefore this risk factor should be assessed as definitely present, it is noteworthy that beyond AH's allegations, there is no indication of Mr. Depp being confrontational, aggressive, or violent while intoxicated with any of his previous partners or other persons in other public or private settings or during other times in his life. His substance abuse did not seem sufficient to impair his capacity for work. He has no drug-related criminal record, and he has no history of driving under the influence. Moreover, the couple regularly recorded conversations as a part of their relationship therapy. AH explained, "They were also a tool to remind Johnny of what he would do when using drugs and alcohol because he would not remember or would deny what he did or said." However, in the evidence provided, there is no recording that shows Mr. Depp intoxicated, nor committing abuse or exhibiting violent behavior that escalated while intoxicated. In this regard, I consider this risk factor ambiguous. Drug and alcohol use is confirmed, but it is totally unclear that it triggers violence in Mr. Depp's case. Thank you. Mental disorder. I did not have access to Mr. Depp's medical history. Therefore, the factors are assessed in the context of the information available. There is no evidence that Mr. Depp suffers any type of serious mental illness or personality disorder. Although AH reported that Mr. Depp had bipolar disorder, manic depression, and occasionally drug-induced psychosis, there is no evidence that he has ever received inpatient care, was incapacitated, required assistance, or physical restraint for such. No mental illness was mentioned by other witnesses or self-reported by Mr. Depp. Psychological status of alleged victimized spouse. I did not have access to AH's medical history. Therefore, I assessed the factor based on AH's statements, notes from health professionals, and the audio recording. The evidence shows that AH was prescribed different medications, Xanax, propranolol, Ambien, and Seroquel, usually recommended to treat anxiety, mood swings, and sleep disturbances. She was also prescribed a stimulant, Provigil, and an anticonvulsant medication, Neurotonin, that is occasionally recommended to treat bipolar disorders. In the several parts of her statement, AH claims that during her relationship with Mr. Depp, she experienced psychopathological symptomology. I was anxious and depressed, which only increased with time. Had post-traumatic stress. I was waking up constantly in panic. Produced by the fear that Mr. Depp might hurt her. I was so worried and anxious about him coming home and hurting me. That was persistent. I was scared all the time. I did not find references to somatic disorders, suicide ideation, are maladaptive behaviors frequently found in IPV victims. Bosch et al. 2017, Brown and Sills 2019, Dillon et al. 2013, Tran et al. 2019. Ms. Heard specifically denied any substance abuse, also prevalent among IPV victims. Nathanielson 2012. The notes of the health professionals who attended Ms. Heard on multiple occasions make no reference to symptoms of post-traumatic stress or depression. They attributed her high anxiety levels to Mr. Depp's absent rather than fear of his abusive behavior. For example, one nurse annotated, "Client continues to state that her anxiety is worsened by the unknown status of relationship with her husband." There are also notes from a nurse that discredit AH's expressed she felt based on her behavior. For example, client expresses feeling sad. RN met client. Client appears in good spirits, laughing, socializing. Appetite normal. It is noteworthy that AH's behavior showed that she was not afraid of Mr. Depp, contrary to her words. Although AH expressed she was frightened by what Mr. Depp might do if she left the relationship and therefore requested a TRO, she also stated, "Because of terms and conditions secured in my divorce statement. Because we were no longer sharing a residence, it became unnecessary for me to engage in and pursue a separate legal action in order to obtain a permanent restraining order." Furthermore, the audio recording of one meeting sought by Ms. Heard alone with Mr. Depp, while under TRO, shows she was not afraid of him at any time. To evaluate the possible existence of trauma bonding, pathological emotional attachment produced in the victim because of abuse, Carnes and Phillips 2019, Dutton and Painter 1993, and suggested that Ms. Heard on multiple occasions in her statements, e.g., "I thought I could fix Johnny. I thought he could get better and that he would, and I wanted so badly right to the end. I spent years trying to support him to get sober to help him and to save our relationship. I dissected face-to-face conversation between the spouses recorded by AH. Maladaptive attachments dynamics are thought to originate from the necessity of self-preservation." Cohen, 2006. Producing in the victim a strong emotional tie to the abuser characterized by cognitive distortions and the adoption of certain behavioral strategies that unintentionally perpetuate the abusive relationship. DeYoung and Lowry, 1992. Allen suggests that the two factors are critical for the occurrence of trauma bonding: social isolation that promotes the lack of other sources of a secure attachment, and the vulnerability and helplessness produced by the imbalance of power. In interactions with their abuser, it is frequent that victims beg, show fear, and promise to behave the way the abuser wants them to. Avoke Falser 2014. This was not, however, AH's behavior. On the contrary, AH displayed many of the characteristics usually found on IPV perpetrators. Goetz, Lehem, Murphy, and Hoover. Yes, seriously. Let's read that again. I'm going to highlight it. On the contrary, AH displayed many of the characteristics usually found in IPV perpetrators, and none of them associated with being the victim. She identified behaviors of Mr. Depp that she disliked. Blamed Mr. Depp for the negative course of their relationship. Blamed Mr. Depp for the violence she perpetrated. Portrayed herself as the victim. Patronized Mr. Depp. Demanded Mr. Depp behave the way she wanted. Blackmailed, threatened Mr. Depp. Used manipulative strategies. Demeaned Mr. Depp. Implied that there was something wrong with him. Minimized the violence she perpetrated. And verbally attacked Mr. Depp. Detailed examples of these abusive behavioral strategies, taken verbatim from AH, are provided in online source 4. Table 2 shows a summary of considerations about credibility of Ms. Heard's testimony for each factor considered on the 6-factor tests, and be safer. The assessment concludes that the testament of AH is of low credibility, indicating that her account of events might not be truthful. Okay, so this goes on for a bit, but this video has already gone on for a moment, so we will probably revisit this at a later date. But I just thought this whole study, independent, with no attachment to either party, would be very interesting to explore. And it's very interesting how these people, not attached to this woman or him in any way, would come to the same conclusions that we have based on evidence alone. So, very telling, very interesting, and we'll definitely be looking at this again at a later date. But for now, we are going to sign off for the afternoon, folks. Now, as always, we don't get many views on this channel. The few that we do get do tend to disappear from time to time. So, folks, please don't forget to hit that like button, hit subscribe, and please don't forget to hit the comments. I do appreciate your time this afternoon, and as always, we here at Spilling Tea hope you have a good one. Bye-bye.